and gentlemen. We are playing some Kerbal. So this is a brand new start. Career mode. The only settings I changed, we allowed all the launch sites. Mostly because I hate doing the initial science for the tech trees. And you're going to quickly see that we're going to power through the early side of this tech tree. Whoops. Before we get started with the vehicle assembly building, go to mission control, gather scientific data, launch our first vessel, escape the atmosphere. We'll come back for these. Got it. We know how to play this game. So we'll be starting with the command pod, and we'll be doing some quick science. So we got our mystery goo pod. We'll actually add 2. Symmetry doesn't matter. Nothing really else we need. Yeah, looks good to me. So we'll just launch this from the launch pad. So we'll get our crew report from the launch pad, do an EVA, get the EVA report, store the EVA report, and then we'll jump. We'll jump again and get flying over to the shores. Very quick, very sneaky. Reboard our vessel and do our 2 mystery goos. Now you get full science from the first one, but we will still get partial science from the second one. Technically, I think you can go up to 3, but we're not concerning ourselves with that. Recover our vessel. Boom, 15 science. Moving on. Go over here to our research and development, and we will spin that 15 science. And we'll get our thermometer. So we'll be taking our same vessel. We will now be adding the thermometer to it. And we're gonna launch from the Boomerang site. This is up in the grasslands biome. So that's just gonna give us some additional science. Because we get the Boomerang launch site biome. If you didn't know about that one. Get our mystery goos, do our EVA, store our EVA, and then we'll get flying over to the grasslands. Jump. Boom. Back in our vessel and recover. Up to 24 science from that. So now we'll add a 45 science for the Science Junior, which is what we're really trying to get to. But we did add our press map barometer. So to this craft, we will now add the press map barometer over here on the top. And we're just going to launch from the launch pad again real fast. We will take these mystery goos just in case they give us 0.2 science. Woo. It's all about the big things, but we don't need the crew report and we don't need the EVAs, but we can get our press map barometer and log our temperatures. Up to 15 science just from that. We'll do the same. Actually, we'll just go straight to a new biome. So the desert launch site. So crew report from the desert launch site biome. Mystery goo as well. Maybe should have brought a third for that point 2, you know? You never know when it's gonna matter. Don't know what happened there. Keep that. Grab our crew report. Oh, already did. EVA. Take our EVA report. Store that one. Get our flying over the desert biome. Nope. And recover. A lot of science there. So yeah, we get 0.7 from the second mystery goose, if you're wondering. Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. All right. 34, we're not quite ready for the science junior. So we're gonna move on to the spice plane hangar. Flip that over. And we'll build the exact same rocket. 2 mystery goose. 1 press mat. And 1 thermometer. And we will launch this from the runway. Get our crew report. Are we moving? Requires more science. I believe we are actually sliding along. It's quite impressive. Log our pressure, log our temperature, and we do need our EVA. We don't have to jump anymore. We already have flying over the shores. Double check the crew report. Good to go. Up to 48 science. Perfect, perfect. We can now grab our science junior. Go back to the spaceplane hangar. Add 2 of those bad boys, and we'll just launch out to the runway real fast. Grab some more mystery goo for that point 2. Every little bit helps in the beginning. Every little bit helps. I don't know if you get anything less than 0.2, but who knows? Who knows? Get 2 science juniors going. Recover the vessel. Cool beans. Got 12 science from that. Back to the spaceplane hangar. So, with the extra biomes, we have the island airfield and the desert airfield, which are both counted as their own biomes. So we will get our science from them as well. A crew report. 2 mystery U's. You know, I wonder if I can do an action group to toggle all these things. That would be pretty sweet. You get the crew report right. EVA report. And I think this still counts as shores. If not, it would be grasslands. It's not water. Recover the vessel. $35 science. Moving along, moving along. This time we will launch from the desert airfield. Crew report. EVA report. Board the vessel. Get our 2 science juniors. Get our 2 mystery goos. Log our pressure. Log our temperature. And recover. Up to 58 science. Moving along, moving along. Believe that takes care of our 3 3 biomes for the launch pad. Let's try this out. Oh, we don't have action groups. We can't do it yet. So we'll just do the launch pad real fast. Grab our 2 science juniors. We'll see if there's any. No, 0 science from that anymore. Go ahead and recover with our science juniors done. 67 science. Cranking it out. And now we'll launch from Boomerang. Boomerang is an excellent place to launch if you're trying to get into some polar orbits, hitting these mountain biomes, something along those lines. It is much further north than regular Kerbal Space Center. Man, it's just a pretty good location to go to. Point 2. Log our pressure, and we should already have. Oh, no, we need a temperature. Cover the vessel. Surprised we didn't get the temperature, must have forgot. And last but not least, the desert launch site. Not to be confused with the desert airway, which is right next to this. They are separate biomes. Crew reports. Already been here, but oh, I thought we hadn't done this one yet. Well, we'll still get our science juniors. No pressure data. Moving too fast for me to keep up with. 91 science. Just like that. Total of 92. That's just from hitting up the starting biomes. So we can get our basic rocketry. General rocketry done. Basic stability is a good place to start. Really want to get to fuel systems. There's no further science to be got. We get the Terrier. The Terrier is such a good engine. Not really seeing much use of those parts. Don't care about planes. Flight control, it's got some usefulness, but we don't really need them. And in the 90 category, we can't afford anything. So we're gonna go with advanced rocketry. We'll get the Terrier engine. Escape the atmosphere mission. And we're ready to launch. So we're actually gonna just take this exact same rocket. We're gonna slap 3 parachutes. We'll do 4 parachutes. Can't go wrong with parachutes. We'll do the R5 fleet. Put 3 basic fins on it to keep it going. And it's pretty rock solid, so I'll show you what we're gonna do with this. We're not done getting local science. So we're ready to launch and get some science from our first vessel. So most importantly, do not put your parachutes and your engine in the same stage. Make sure you fix that if you are following along at home. So we got some different biomes to operate on here. This is all the shores. This is the grasslands. Grasslands we're not trying to hit from here. We'll hit that from Boomerang. But the crawler way, the tracking center, the mission control, the spaceplane hangar, vehicle assembly building, research and development, astronaut complex, flagpole, and the astronaut complex are all, oh no, administration building. This is the astronaut complex. Are all different biomes. So we're going to use our tiny rocket to do our first launch contract, as well as try and hit up some of these biomes. We'll do that like so. We're gonna immediately take a left turn to 270-degree heading, try and keep it slight, and we'll see how far we end up. If we go too far, no big deal. And just go ahead and deploy those parachutes. Might have been too far. Go ahead and speed up time. Oh, looks like we just overshot. That's okay. The shorts is also a biome we need to hit up. And technically, we'll get some science just from launching into the air. Which kind of makes, if I had a scientist, I could have taken these science out and reset these experiments and avoided an extra flight. Just a pro tip, you don't really need a pilot. Jebediah didn't really do much flying. Bill, the scientist, would have been more than perfect for this. Is it Bill or Bob? Who knows? Right, we're coming in for a nice gentle landing. So we'll get some science from Curving Shores. Did we take a crew report? We should have taken a crew report in the air, but we didn't. So we'll get our EVA report. We will take our temperature and pressure from the air. We'll re-enter, and then we will log our landed temperature and pressure. And that concludes our first flight. Back up to 73 science, just like that. So we're just gonna launch this rocket a couple of more times. Touchdown. Oh no! So if you do fall over, make sure you don't block your door. If you block the door, you can't get out. Not too terrible, but... Nope, still need that crew report. See? Let's see if we can wiggle this rocket around. No. I think we're done skis. Really want to do the EVA. Oh well. I cannot stress enough fuel systems when you get to 90 science technology. Fuel systems. It is the best tech in the game, in my opinion. A little less so since they added a lot more solid booster rockets, which are plenty useful, as we will hopefully get to see. But for the 90 science, I mean, power generation, the octoprobodyne core, these are all good things. The solar panels, the first ones, are exceptionally useful. Miniaturization doesn't really give you too much, but it does give you the Clampotron docking port junior, which is pretty useful if you know what you're doing. The hitchhiker pod here is probably the best thing. The ladder is probably the most underrated thing ever. Super useful for that. The rest I could care kind of less for. Propulsion systems, you don't get much. You get the spark, the ant, and the mite, which are all small rocket size parts. Then you get the couple of small fuel tanks, which are pretty useful for some unique builds, and the minified monopropellant I don't really use ever. Heavy rocketry does give you some nice things for bigger rockets, but we haven't even built small rockets, so we can kind of hold off on that. Though this Pollux solid fuel booster is definitely one of my favorites. I don't like the kickback just because of how big it is physically, where the Pollux is much smaller with substantial more thrust and solid fuel. It's a wider rocket, but fuel systems, not for the fuel tanks. Fuel tanks are nice, but this, the FTX TAC-2 external fuel duct, is the single most important part in the entire Kerbal space program, hands down. So with it we can do asparagus style rockets, which vastly improves your launch efficiency for getting things off the ground. So basically the only way to get heavier rockets into space is to add more fuel and more engines, but then you have to carry the fuel and the engines up to the point that they're at least completely empty before you ditch them with decouplers. Whereas with the fuel lines, you can do asparagus style, which means we can put our booster rockets on the sides of our rocket, and couple them with these fuel ducts so that all of the booster rockets and the main engines burn the same tank of fuel. So from the first stage of booster rockets, all engines will burn that fuel. And when it is empty, we can ditch that empty fuel tanks and the engines, and then every other booster rocket and main engine will be at full fuel and full thrust capability. So it maximizes the weight distribution of our rocket. Otherwise, we burn all the boosters at the same time, and they burn for longer, but when we ditch them, they'll all be empty and will be much higher, where we can get rid of all that weight of the empty fuel tanks and the empty engines significantly sooner, so the rest of the rockets don't even have to work as hard. Because probably the fundamental problem I have with rocket design is sometimes I have a payload that I want to get to space, and in trying to get that payload at a certain weight launched into space, I add more fuel or bigger engines to the rocket, which makes the entire rocket heavy, which then detracts from the effectiveness of the rocket that I'm already trying to build. So I just keep adding more and more things to try and get the bigger and bigger rocket to do the same fucking thing, and it doesn't work out. So sometimes less is more, and you got to play around with your thrust weight ratios, your fuel efficiency of your engines, just a lot of stuff. But sometimes just adding more fuel and more engines doesn't necessarily solve your problem. We still have 60 science after getting the fuel systems. Kind of really want the hitchhiker pod so we can do tourism. Really want the solar panels. Flight control is super good. Struts. After fuel duct, maybe even before fuel duct. Struts are king. Struts are probably like your rocket wobbles. Things aren't structurally connected very well. Add more struts. You can. That is why our flag for this playthrough on stream is the Strutco flag. You cannot go wrong with more struts. Which is kind of weird because Strutco doesn't even make the strut. Made by Curlington Model Rockets and Paper Products Incorporated. What does Strutco make? Plane parts are pretty good. I mean, plane parts kind of suck. Unless you're doing these types of missions. Of which we have all of these missions. We have Orbit Kerbal. It does suck that we have all of these. Which ones are below? Above, we don't care about. Below, whoops. Leave the facility. Upgrade. In-flight below. In-flight below. In-flight below. In-flight below. Flight below. Flight above. Nope. I hate trying to make these parameters. If it's landed on Kerbal or splashed down on Kerbal, I might consider it, but if it's not one of those, then I don't really care. Go to our tracking station real fast. Hopefully all of those are, yep. The starter missions are all right around Kerbal, but eventually you'll start getting missions that are like way over here. I don't recommend it. It's not worth your time because you gotta fly a plane from Kerbal Space Center all the way over here to get that kind of stuff done, and it's just not worth it. Looking for the one that says above. So if this was right on the Space Center, I would do it in a rocket. It's not really worth a rocket to fly over there. We took most of those because we'll get a plane and they're all right around the Kerbal Space Center, so we'll make a couple quick bucks just flying around a plane real fast and getting that stuff. The big problem with the early plane is not necessarily being able to do those missions, it's the part limitation of 30 parts, which stops you from getting them all in one go, but it's a plane, so just land back on the runway and go get your stuff. But anyway, we'll conclude this one with a real rocket. So we gotta escape the atmosphere. We kind of want to keep our science modules going. So biomes to hit, we have upper atmosphere, we have space. That's pretty much it. So I think we have enough parachutes that we could reasonably save all our rocket parts. But we don't need to be so thrifty because we are going to make money. So that's 1200, 400 Delta V. Add another 800 fuel. 2000 Delta V. Check thrust to weight ratio is greater than 1, which means we'll actually lift off the rocket from this stage. If it's less than 1, then you don't have enough engine. Which means your rocket just kind of sits there, all sad like. Now, isn't quite enough to get to space and orbit. I mean, maybe if we had a super efficient launch, but it's not really what I'm trying to do. We'll be able to touch space and we'll be able to come back. While we probably don't need a thermal heat shield, it's not gonna hurt anything. Oops. Tester 1. Tester 1 will be our first launch. All right, so some basics of rocketry if you've never done this before. East, 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 east. That's west, right? No, on my screen pointing east. So towards 90 degrees is the direction you want to go. So basically, Kerbal is turning this way. So if we head towards the horizon, we can capitalize on its own speed moving counter to us, and it'll be more efficient. It's not to say you can't go counter or in line with Kerbal's rotation. It's just you're going to have to match its own speed and then surpass it to actually get orbit, whereas this way it kind of helps you. And we call that a gravity turn. We're still using Bob. I'll be honest, I'm gonna revert this flight back to the vehicle assembly building. I don't like taking non-pilots for actual flights. Mostly because I like my SAS. Alright, we have ignition. We're accelerating. Kind of slow. Slower than I wanted to be. So at 100 meters a second, we'll start our gravity turn. This rocket's not super controllable. But there we go, we kind of have it on point, nice and stable. And then something I kind of like to do based on an old tutorial I saw a long time ago is at approximately 300 meters a second, I throttle down to maintain 300 until I'm at least 10k meters up. And then we go back to full throttle. And then you can just follow prograde. So prograde is this little symbol on your compass. And you just want to kind of keep it in the center and follow it down. And that's how you're going to end up on a nice orbital trajectory with very little thought. It doesn't require a lot of rocket science to do that. Mike Jeb will obviously do a much more efficient ascent. But what you gonna do? We're actually almost to space. That's space right there. Jettison that engine. We'll just work on some horizontal velocity. While we're up here, we will get our science that we want. I'm going to go ahead and get the crew report from upper atmosphere, even though the one from space will be more valuable. Same with the pressure and temperature, just because I'm more likely to miss the upper atmosphere biome later on. At approximately 72, right there, 71.6 or so is the actual transition to space. You'll hear the music switch over. I doubt we can orbit, but we'll try. I mean, actually, we got plenty of Delta V, so it'll be close. I don't want to push it too much. So we'll just go to apoapsis, do a full burn at prograde. So this is your apoapsis. Your apoapsis is your highest point in your orbit. Our periapsis, which we currently don't have, is at negative 350 kilometers. We got to get that all the way to at least 72, and then we will have a stable orbit. So your apoapsis is your highest point, your periapsis is your lowest point. And right now, being in the Earth is not very good for us. It's coming up right now, and stop. Boom, we did it. We actually achieved orbit. Not that I care to actually go around, but we can. Speed up time. And there we go. Orbiting the Earth. Go around a couple times, have some fun. So for coming down, just point the rocket at retrograde. Burn until we get our periapsis. So you can burn it till you're back to a -1. But the more of your horizontal velocity you get rid of, the more straight down your entry will be. Whereas if you keep it high up in the atmosphere, you'll actually use more of the atmosphere and the thicker air to slow you down, and then you have a nice gentle ascent or descent as you come in and slowly go down. The downside is we're currently moving 2,221 meters per second in orbit around Kerbal, so flying through the air at that fast generates a lot of friction and a lot of heat, which is why we brought that heat shield. We don't need the engine, we don't need the fuel. Normally I don't like wasting it, I'll use it on re-entry, but we don't need it today. So we'll just hold stable here and we'll go around until we actually enter the atmosphere. Slow down real fast. We'll close the doors. Not a necessary step at all, but I like the looks. Re-aim retrograde to our current position. And 70, we switched over, automatically stops your time warp. You don't have to worry about that unless you're going super fast, in which case it's possible that it'll just miss the stop and warp you straight into the center of the planet. Dead splat. So now we're beginning our ascent. We're at 4x speed. Pretty much once whenever you feel like it, you can go ahead and activate the last stage. And if you'll notice, if you look at your parachutes, they now say disarm, safe to deploy, unsafe. So you have the minimum pressure atmosphere. We're in space, technically, kind of. So the minimum pressure isn't enough for them to deploy the first stage of the parachute. And then the minimum altitude or maximum altitude at which they fully deploy is the second parameter, and that's at 1,000 meters. So they'll deploy their first stage as soon as they hit 0.04 atmospheres, and then they'll deploy fully at 1,000 meters. But since we don't meet any of those conditions, they are just armed, and now they are automatic, and we don't have to worry about deploying them manually. Our speed is kicked up to 23, or 2.3 thousand meters per second. Coming in at 58, our periapsis is 30 and shrinking. Apoapsis is still in space, even though that no longer matters. It is behind us. So the reason why you want to keep retrograde pointed, it's hard to do at time warp, as you'll see in a second. Perfect, we're going over the dark side of Kerbal, so you'll be able to get a nice good view of this. You see that heat shield is already starting to glow, and there we go, there's the atmospheric thermals coming online. There we go. Let's go all enabled. If things get really hot, as you see right there, boom, a temperature gauge pops up. That marks that this piece is getting to its limits. If it goes all the way off the gauge, then the piece is liable to destroy itself, which is why we have the heat shield on the bottom. So as long as we keep it pointed retrograde, the heat shield will get the brunt of the atmospheric abrasion, in which case we have an ablator. Ablator is a material that kind of boils and then evaporates and sloughs off the heat shield. So it's a material you put on there specifically for that boiling effect, which will quickly and efficiently, because the fastest way of heat transfer is a phase change, so it just keeps boiling off slowly. You start with 200 on this particular size heat shield, and we're already down to 187. It's kind of excessive and overkill. We're not going to go past like probably 160. so you don't need the full 200. But for really long burns, if you're starting your burn high up in the atmosphere, or if it's going to require several passes to actually deorbit you, then you want to make sure you have plenty of it. And basically, as that Science Junior is getting hit, we just gotta recorrect our retrograde alignment, and we'll protect it from that heat. If you can't quite maintain temperature, but you're trying to save a rocket that may be starting to tumble because it's not weight oriented towards the bottom there, you can just keep trying to spin the rocket as much as possible to keep it from overheating. We're getting pretty close. It's like jumping, but we keep moving the rocket slightly to move the heat to a different part. Wobbly rockets doing a little dance. Starting to lose control. I can't get it focused again. But there we go, we're slowing down now. Almost sub 1,000 meters per second. Perfect. Now we don't even care. We'll turn SAS off. Just let the rocket, see, it wants to reorient like a lawn dart and just come in that way. Alright, starting to get worried here. Why aren't my parachutes deploying? Weird. Not exactly sure why that happened. I don't think I've ever had them deploy so low. We'll just ride this the rest of the way down. This height is above ground level. This is above sea level. Default is sea level, by the way. And anytime you're over the water, that means sea level. So you know that this is 100% accurate. If you're looking at sea level above ground, you'll find that you won't go to 0 before you touch down. If you are warping at time speed, just something to pay attention to. It is possible when you're coming in too fast on a warp that the bottom, like Science Junior here, could dip below the waterline a little too heavy, and then actually detach and get lost to the depths of the ocean. I always like to touch down at normal speed and safely control the craft. We're gonna roll over. We'll grab an EVA report. We will take the data from our temperature and barometer. We'll take the crew report. We will let go. Jump up and, oh wait, Store experiments. Jump up and get our flying above water. And try and do our best to crawl back into this craft. There we go. And then we can take our last crew report from landing here, as well as a quick pressure and temperature from this biome, and that wraps up that science. Look at that, that was our first launch. We already made it to orbit. We have 165 science in the bank. Doing good. We got all the carbon upper atmosphere pretty much done. No real need to do that. Jeb leveled up to level 1. We're in a good position. We can start some real space maneuvers coming up here. We will grab these plane parts because we do want to do those temperature and pressure observations. And we're going to grab general construction. Not going to leave us now for a second 90-degree tech or 90 research tech, but what you going to do? And that'll be it for this session. So thanks for joining me, and we'll get back to it next time. Take care.